Camp collars are a beautiful thing, just like this one. And previously on this channel, I've shown you 2 techniques to finish this. And now we have a third way. Believe it or not, there is a really easy way to do this if your shirt pattern has a yoke. Hi sewing friends, I'm Karina from liftingpinsandneedles.com. Welcome to this channel that is all about sewing, Limitless sewing, and today is about camp collars again. I have touched on this topic every couple of years because it's a really nice type of collar. You can see it right there. It's got a little lapel, it's got a little collar here. And there are a few patterns that have this feature that you might find from different brands, both for men, both for women. And I've shown you in the past how to sew this the traditional way. The traditional way has you doing a little snip underneath in the upper collar that allows you to fold the seam allowance inside. Some people might be a little bit allergic to doing those snips, or just in general scared of the technique because it looks a little bit daunting, but it really isn't if you take your time. I do have a really detailed video showing you how to do that. I used the Melody Dolman shirt from Love Notions as an example there, and this is what I'm talking about. You would have a facing on the front that's folded in at the shoulder seam, but then at this point you have a snip that allows all the seam allowance to come up like that. So in this area, you have less layers and that is folded in and edge stitched. So this would be the traditional way to do the camp collar. And it's the way that you see instructions do it from all the patterns you ever see. As with any skill, if you do it a few times, you'll become an expert and it'll be no issue doing the snips and all the things that that technique needs. Now, if you want a shortcut, I've shown you how you can create your own back facing. What that back facing does is that you have a shoulder seam for the main pieces and for the inside of the shirt, which allows you to sandwich the collar in between, and then you don't need to snip anything. It's one seam. You just sandwich your collar between your facings and your neckline and you go boom, and then you're done. So that could be a really easy way to do a shortcut. I've done that a lot with some of my camp collars like that. There's some top stitching there I do to hold it in place. I've created a playlist with camp collars because now I have a third way. And this third way came about because I've been sewing a shirt that will be released at Love Notions this Tuesday. If you're in the newsletter or the Facebook group, you might have seen some sneak peeks, some pictures already. You might have known that this shirt pattern is coming, and it's called Band Camp Shirt. It's both for men and women. There's different versions there. Pretty similar with some differences, of course, but they all have a camp collar. What is cool is one of the options here is that you have a yoke at the back, which is double, and there's a burrito method in there. And when I was cutting out my pieces, I thought, why don't I just sandwich that collar using that yoke there? Because you are going to have 2 layers of fabric all around the neckline anyway, because you have 2 layers of that yoke. So if your shirt has a yoke and it's double, you can use the method that I'm going to show you now. If your shirt pattern just has you do 1 yoke, like some do, just ignore that and do 2, just cut 2 pieces and then you'll be sweet. Now, if your pattern does not have a yoke and it just has a simple back, then I would say do the traditional method or do the facing shortcut way. Or if you're really experimental in your sewing, create your own yoke. Just cut the back piece in 2, maybe about 1.5 inches above the notches for the sleeves. Just go all the way through, cut it, add seam allowance, and then you have yourself a yoke that you can cut twice. That's only if you want to be super experimental, because it would change the look of your pattern. If you don't want to change the look of a shirt, if you like the plain back, then what I'm going to show you is not going to work. Let's see how to sandwich this collar in between those 2 yoke pieces and the facing and everything. It's super easy. I'm also going to be able to enclose the bottom of the yoke seam here at the back, the horizontal seam. So it's going to end up super neat. You are going to be seeing a sneak peek of one of the band camp shirts in this tutorial. Keep your eyes open for the new pattern release at Love Notions on Tuesday, the band camp shirt for men and women. I'll be sharing some versions for myself, some for my son. I'm also going to have a video on the Love Notions YouTube channel where the traditional camp collar technique would be included in all full-on detail. The same sewing style that you see over here on this channel, it's going to be over there as well. So stay tuned Tuesday morning. Let's see how to do this sneaky way, which doesn't involve you changing pattern pieces, nothing like that. You have everything you need. We're just changing the way it's done, and it's so easy, and you don't need to snip or create pattern pieces. This is a shirt that has a camp style collar. This is the front and it's got an integrated facing, which means the black area there is the facing. It's just an extension of the front. when you fold it back, it incorporates the neckline and part of the shoulder. So that's easy. This would also work if your pattern had a separate piece where you had to have a seam here. Some patterns have a separate facing that you interface and you sew on, and you would have a seam there. The technique for this collar would be the same. What is special about this technique is that you're not creating any new pattern pieces. You're just going to use your yokes. This pattern has a yoke here, and the yoke is double. There's going to be a burrito method involved, but the way that I'm going to do it is going to be a little bit different because I'm going to utilize the fact that we have 2 layers of the neckline here along the back to not have to snip into these areas of the collar later on. So it's going to make it super easy. I'm still going to be able to enclose the shoulder seams and the seam that unites the back piece that comes underneath afterwards. But I'm also going to be able to sandwich this collar in between the neckline areas in one go without needing to do any snips. This method is not going to work if your pattern does not have a yoke piece. So this is something that's going to work if your pattern does have a yoke piece. So that's something to take into account. Now first, before anything, we need to stay stitch. I'm going to stay stitch the back neckline for both of the yokes. That's super important. And I'm also going to stay stitch all of this area right here because this area of the facing is also the neckline. Later when we sew the collar, we're going to use a 3/8 seam allowance. So this stay stitching around the neckline needs to be a little bit smaller than that. That's one back yoke neckline done. Now I'm going to repeat the same with the other back neckline. Now the front neckline is similar. It's just that half is interfaced and half isn't. This is a step that you really can't skip unless you want this to stretch out as you sew and then have the collar be too short for your neckline. You need to protect the curve of the neckline here with the stay stitching. Here we have the 2 collar pieces together, right sides together. You can see the pretty prints touching right there. The black one that you see here is the interfaced one. This will be the upper collar. The one on the back is the under collar and it's not interfaced. We have an upper edge that's quite straight and longer than this curved edge at the bottom. At the bottom is where you're going to have notches. So that is the area that we don't want to sew. We want to sew these short ends and the straight edge on the top. So let's get this sewn. This pattern uses 3/8 seam allowance, but if you're working with another one, it will probably be another seam allowance. That doesn't matter. When I get to here, I'm not going to pivot. I'm going to finish the seam and then start again. So I have an intersection of seams. Okay, there we have it. Now on these corners, I like that intersection of seams because it makes the area more stable and I don't snip into that seam allowance either. I just fold it. I like that intersection of seams there because it makes the area more stable. I can fold them onto themselves towards the under collar, not snipping any seam allowance away and then just flipping. And you always get a nice little corner right there without making the area weaker. So I'm going to flip the other side as well, and then I'm going to head over to the iron and press this neatly so that it's nice and neat so we can put it in between the neckline now. Got to press the seam open in here, just neaten it all up. Here is a very neat collar. Now on the inside we had some marks. The only mark that's really important for this technique is the center, and you can see it there. The other ones that are here that would match the shoulder seams, they're not really that important because we're not going to be snipping into them. But what I want to do is baste the bottom of this collar so that it stays together in one piece and the raw edges don't move around. So that's just something extra I'm going to do to make my life easier. And I'm doing this on the edge. The half point mark is still in there. I can still see it, and I'm just going to pin it right here. Another thing I'm going to do, just with a colorful pin, is just make a mark that this is the upper collar, this is the interfaced area. So where I don't have a pin, that's the under collar, this is the non-interface side because that's important later. I've chosen one of the yoke pieces, it doesn't really matter which one it is, and I'm just going to sew the bottom part of it to it. You don't need to sew it at this point, but I think it's going to be easier to see what I'm doing if it's on here. So this is the bottom part of the back, and this one has a pleat on the center. There's a mark on the pattern, and I've just sewn the pleat from the wrong side and just pressed it open. So from the right side, it looks like an inverted box pleat, but you can do it the other way around if you want. So I'm just going to align this and get it sewn smaller than 3/8 seam allowance, and it's just a basting stitch. So I'll just quickly get this done, and then we can start putting the neckline and the collar together. Now that we have the back sewn on and the yoke right here, we need to place it right sides up. Now, one thing I want to point out is that you don't need to serge any of the shoulder seams. These are all going to be enclosed with this technique. So you can see they're all raw right there. So now we're going to take our two front pieces. Here is one shoulder seam. Here is the other shoulder seam right there. And we're going to sew these two. All of these seams go pressed towards the back. So we're not pressing the seam open. They're both raw. Let's just get them sewn at 3/8 of an inch. Okay, here are the shoulder seams that we've just done. I've got the seam allowance pressed towards the back here. And now we have all of this going on right here. This is actually the integrated facing that we have on that side. And this is where we're going to sew the shoulder seams to the other yoke. But it's only going to be partial. To make it easier, let's put this yoke that we have free on the table, wrong sides up. Let's take this neckline like this and just extend it. This is right sides up. This is the little partial shoulder seam that we have there, and it's going to look like this. Here's our yoke, and at the back we have our partial facing that's interfaced. These two edges need to match. This is the outer edge of the neckline. It's going to match this over here, and we're going to have leftover shoulder with the yoke, and the facing is going to be shorter. So we're just going to align those right here. I'm showing it to you like this so it's easier to understand, but I'm going to be sewing from the facing side up, because that's the interface side. So it's only going to be a short little seam, and part of the shoulder is going to be on its own over there. And then on the other side, we have the same thing happening. We bring this side over and we align it right there. I'm also going to be sewing from this side. So what we have is that little yoke at the back by itself with the facing pinned right there on both sides. Shoulder left over from the yoke, but that's fine. We're going to sew those two little seams, and we're also going to press the seam allowance towards the back. What happens now that we've sewn both the shoulder seams, the regular shoulder seams that had the full length, and the little partial shoulder seams that are sewn to the facing, is that we have 2 layers of fabric all around the neckline. So this is the integrated facing. This is where the fold starts, where that line of interfacing is, and same on the other side. And now in between these 2 layers, we're going to sandwich the collar in between. The collar is going to reach up to a mark on the fabric, so you're going to have a little bit left over here with no collar. That is the camp collar style. And so now it's going to be really easy to just sandwich the collar in between and then just do one seam and be done with it. And then we can flip it and it's all super neat. The collar is going to be enclosed within the 2 yoke layers at the back and the facing on the front. And then this little piece over here, we can enclose also doing the burrito method at the end. And that's going to join both yoke pieces on this seam right there. Okay, here we are at the sewing machine. This is the short little yoke. First, I'm going to pin the collar to the layer that's on the bottom, which is the main layer, the main yoke with the main shoulders. I'm going to put a pin to mark the center back right there. And now we take our collar. We need to take the layer that's the under collar that's not interfaced. That's the one that's going to touch the neckline here, right sides together. I had put a pin to mark that this is my upper collar. This is the one that should be looking up at you, the layer that's interfaced. So that's correct. I'm going to match the center backs over here with a pin. And then I'm going to keep pinning this along the collar until I get to this mark that we have on the pattern. I have a mark in yellow. And this needs to be accurate so that the collar ends up looking symmetrical on both sides. And all the rest is going to fit 1-to-1 right here and the same on the other side. So I'm just going to take my time to pin everything. Once I've got it pinned, I'm going to bring this second layer and use the same pins to pin it all over again. Okay, here I have the collar pinned all along. Very nice. I made sure that both edges of the collar are matching exactly the marks on the fabric here because they need to be symmetrical. And now these are the layer that's on top. Now we can pin this one on. Here we also have the yellow mark. That's the same one that's on the other side. And I'm going to make sure they are right on top of each other. I'm going to be using the same pins to pin everything again. Same as on this side, there's the yellow mark. It's going to match this one over here. So the colors end up being exactly the same. This distance here the same as the one on the other side. And here I'm going to use the same pins to pin it all over again. These shoulder seams, this little one over here and the normal one at the bottom, need to be at the same place. So I'm going to be sure to match those up. Right there. Here it is. one whole seam from that side to the other side is going to sew the collar in. Collar is going to be sandwiched between the two yoke layers and the front facings over here. So it's such an easy technique. It avoids you doing all the snipping and other things to the collar, and I really enjoy it. And why not use these two layers that are already there in the pattern anyway? This is just one seam. It's not too long. It's a medium length seam. It's not straight though, so you have to be careful because there's quite a bit of curves here, so there's no rush. I'm going slowly, always feeling with my fingers to see if I'm getting any puckers underneath. I'm always trying to keep all the raw edges together. I'm going to check the layer underneath to make sure I didn't get any accidental puckers or that the seam allowances went to the wrong side, which sometimes happens. It's all looking smooth, so that's good. And now this is all very curved, so I'm going to do a few snips here. Not through the seam line, but close to it so that it relieves the tension here. Snip all the way around the curve. Now we have the collar in. It's gorgeous. Let me just flip this properly so we get a nice little point there. There we have it, camp collar style. And what I really wanted was this to be symmetrical. You can see the distance is the same for both sides, so it's a symmetrical collar. So that's important. That's why you have the marks on the pattern that you need to match in there. So that's very, very nice. I'm gonna head over to the table now and show you how we're gonna enclose this seam that's still dangling about. Now we're going to enclose the yoke seam, this horizontal one. So we're gonna extend our shirt here, right sides up. The back is over here. We can leave the fronts hanging to the sides. We don't need to roll that up in this burrito roll. We're going to extend this little yoke that's at the back so we can see this raw edge right there. And then we're just going to roll all this up, the back piece, roll until we see the seam that we had done previously, uniting the main yoke to the main back. We've done that with a basting stitch. And now we can bring this raw edge and match it up here. And that's what we're going to sew. Easy peasy. Let me repeat. Extend the shirt on the table, right sides up. Fronts can be ignored. You can just leave them. Extend that small yoke that you have up there so you can see the raw edge. And then just roll up the back until you see the seam. Bring this raw edge over here to meet that one. And that's how we're going to sew it. Now this is a very straight seam, quite simple. This time I'm sewing with a real seam allowance. Seam I'd done before was a little smaller. I think you can still see that seam there. And we're uniting 3 layers of fabric here. Okay, that is the seam that we've just done. And now all we need to do is pull the shirt out from in here. And it's all gonna come out. And now what do we have? We have this seam from the yoke that's enclosed, little pleat coming from behind. We have our front facing right here. We have our collar in the middle. No need to snip. The collar is between these layers. It's very neat. And now there's just one small detail we need to finish with the shoulder right here. And then I would call this technique complete. After this, I feel like I've sewn the whole shirt because all I have to do now is do the side seams, do the hem, setting my sleeve, buttonholes and buttons, just details. Here we have our front facing. This is the back. All these shoulder seam allowances are going towards the back, but we still have this open situation here and we can still enclose it. For this short little area of the shoulder that didn't have any more because the facing just went up to there. When I went to press, I also pressed that in by 3/8. You can see I have a memory crease. So all I have to do is align that memory crease forward to the seam right underneath. And I'm just gonna hold it there with my fingers. And then I can just flip this to the inside like this. And I can align this partial shoulder that's free to these layers over here, pin them, and then I can sew it. It's just a small section. I don't need to sew the whole thing. From in between, I can see the facing right there. So just from there is where I'm gonna start sewing. So just that, right on top of the seam I already have. And that is going to enclose the shoulder seams fully. You'll never see raw areas. It's going to be super neat. So you do have access to get into this area and just flip it so you can see the seams. And then we can just flip it back out. So I'm sewing right on top of that seam I already have. Okay, there's the seam sewn. And now how does this look? Gorgeous. It's all been sewn by machine from the inside. We have easy access. Another way, if you didn't want to sew this by machine, was to just align the fold and then slip stitch by hand there. But what's the point if we can do it with a machine? It's so easy. So here on this side, it's the same. I have my raw seam that you can see there. I have my memory crease from this side that has the facing. I'm just going to align them right there. Get my fingers inside, hold the seam allowances together, and then just flip this. And I can get access to sewing this little seam right here, like that. I'm going to show you a little bit here, not to give it all away. But here you can see that partial shoulder seam from our front, integrated facing. And then we have 2 layers for the yoke right there. This is the seam that's enclosed. And then the collar is enclosed between all the layers here. It's so neat, it's so easy. It was super fast to do. It didn't make me do any snips or any hand basting, nothing like that. It was very easy. And I suggest you give it a go if you want to experience something new. If you just want to add more techniques to your toolbox that lives in your head, then this is a really, really fun way to do this, and an alternative to doing the traditional method, which is also fine. It's just that I love knowing that there's so many ways that we can get to the same result. Sometimes one technique resonates better with you than others. And I'm all about having fun in your sewing. I'm all about getting to the same result, but the experience is really important. And if there are different techniques for you to choose from, I think that's really valuable. And that's why I do all this work here on YouTube. That's why I call my channel Limitless Sewing, because there's no limits really. You can think up new ways and end up with amazing results. So give this a go maybe. Bye, see you soon.